Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome here to another episode of Dinner Guide. I am your host Chef Andy, and today we've got something particularly interesting from the beautiful American continent. We're also going to be focusing on some very beautiful dishes in some of the beautiful continents around our African continent itself. But today I'm going to be taking you all the way to the American one, when basically we're going to be just bringing a very simple dessert to the table, which is the American pie. American apple pie. So before we proceed, I'll begin by introducing my ingredients. And from the front, I've got some sugar there. I've also got 2 pieces of eggs. I've also got some nutmeg, a bit of some unsalted butter, about a tablespoon and a half. I've also got some cinnamon powder and some vanilla essence, and of course 1 piece of whole lemon. In the bowls at the back here also we've got some pastry cases that we had made in advance, and this is where we are basically going to be setting our pies in. And then last but not least, some 4 apples here, which of course are going to constitute for the filling. And just wrapped up on the side here is a little more pastry that we are going to be using to cover up the pies at the top, and basically give it that nice beautiful finish. So we're going to now take a very short commercial break, and when we do so, we're going to give you a chance to just refresh and grab your pens and papers if you're taking notes for this recipe. And when we come back, we're going to just dive into this very simple dish. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who missed the introduction, we're just about to start a very, very simple dish, which is an apple pie. And I'll start that off by heating up my pan. But before we do so, we are going to first prepare some of the ingredients which we're going to be using for the pie. So we're going to start off very simply by grabbing some 2 bowls here. And all we are going to do now is proceed to peel these red, beautiful apples. Of course, making sure to be very, very wary of peeling too much of the skin and wasting your apple. So very, very important that you actually do take quite a bit of time in peeling. If you can do it slower and more precise, very much allowed. But all you need to do is just take the skins off, and then proceed also to core the apples, which we're also going to do in a little bit. So if I can give you a small history of this very, very beautiful pastry dish we're making today, very much an American classic and very much a seasonal dessert, very common for most occasions in the American continent. And that is why particularly we chose this very, very, very simple dish for you to try. And then a second thing as well to note is it's also a very, very touchy dish, especially when it comes to your pastry. So very important that you have the best pastry you can find, and the best apples, of course. And lastly, one thing we could also mention is it's also a dish that will require quite a bit of labor. So very important that if you are going to be using some convenience items that you can buy, do so in a good amount of time, way ahead of the time that you're going to be making your apple pie. So I'm just going to proceed to finish peeling the last 2 pieces. And also some additions you can also add to that. You can actually incorporate quite a bit of ingredients to your apple pie. You could actually use also 2 different color apples. It will actually give it quite a bit of a boost in flavor. And you can actually incorporate some dry fruits if you do have any. Raisins and sultanas do really well for this dish. On various occasions I've actually had also questions if you can actually add some nuts. It's very much allowed to. I personally like almonds, so if you can actually be able to incorporate almonds to this recipe, and if you have them in stock, you can actually throw them in there. So just go right through to the very end. Of course, as we said, making sure to limit your waste to the best of your ability. Right, so once the skins are done, just discard those. And now using your knife, proceed to cut your apples, making sure, of course, to go around the center and, of course, leaving the cores out. And proceed to do the same for the other pieces, making sure to go around and leave the core untouched. For this is actually the very simplest way to actually get rid of all your seeds around the inside. Now just to finish that off, repeat the same to the very end. And once done, of course, start to cut your apples up into some half-inch chunks. Of course, at this stage, not very particular how you decide to chop your apples up, as long as they're one consistent size that will allow them to cook in a similar and even amount of time. It's actually very much allowed. So just proceed to chop everything together, of course taking precaution not to add any seeds that may actually still be in your apple slices, and of course any other pieces that might be in there that you don't really want in your pie. This is a very good time to take your chance to actually make sure you don't incorporate them in your dish. A few other alternatives you can actually also use for pie filling. There's actually very many options. You could either go vegetable, you could go meat, you could also go savory. So there is quite a bit of leverage when you're making a pie. But of course, the basics are very much the same, which of course include the pastry that you use, and of course the very simple techniques to actually get to that very point of calling it a pie. Okay, so your apples are now peeled and chopped. We're just going to proceed now to heat up a pan. And to the pan now, I'm going to add my butter. Give that a bit of time to reheat. I'm also going to be incorporating some ingredients to that, which will basically be some vanilla extract, some cinnamon powder, and lastly some nutmeg. And now, while your butter continues to melt, be sure also to move your pan around, allowing for your butter to melt a little faster. And once almost completely melted, proceed to add in your apples. And using a spoon or a flat spoon or a wooden spoon if you prefer, just begin to give your apples a mixture. Of course, making sure that they're all coated in that melted butter. At that stage now, you can begin to add your cinnamon powder and your nutmeg powder, and lastly your vanilla extract. Then proceed to mix that once more. Right, so your apples should actually cook really fast. Remember, red apples cook very, very quickly, so very important to cook them in the shortest time possible and on the highest heat. And now to that, we're just going to proceed to sprinkle some sugar right over the apples. Of course, reserving some sugar, which I'll show you what to do with later. And last but not least, we're also going to incorporate a bit of that beautiful lemon. But I'm going to start off by just peeling just a little bit of skin there. And then proceed once more to remove as much of that white core that you may find on the inside. And now just proceed to cut your lemon skin into some very, very simple cubes. And that should actually be about a third of a teaspoon of some very finely chopped lemon skin or lemon zest. And now proceed to mix everything together. Of course, also always remembering to continue giving your mixture a mix as it continues, making sure that all your apple pieces are actually cooked evenly and they're not too mushy or too overcooked once they're done. Right, so we're going to allow that to proceed to cook for another 4 to 5 minutes on very low heat. So just reduce your heat at this stage and continue to mix your ingredients through. And just as soon as your apples just start to soften up, they should actually just start to feel like some potatoes in there, nice and soft, and of course with a nice, beautiful and rich golden color. We're now going to take those off the heat and drain them, but we're going to give that another 4 to 5 minutes. And while we do so, we're also going to proceed to prepare our bowls that we're actually going to set our pies in. So I'm going to begin by grabbing the first one, and remember I have used some aluminium to line this. You can actually also replace that with some wax-proof paper or some grease-proof paper. But very important to also remember, there is something on the inside which you may not be able to see unless I tilt that over. You might be able to see the green grams which are inside there. So this is basically just to really give the pastry just a bit of weight and not allow it to expand while it's inside the bowl. And what you're looking for, it should actually give us a nice beautiful cup when it's finally cooked. So very important that you actually be very careful when taking those out. Always make them and give them a bit of time to cool off. And then when it's time to take them off, just begin by just holding the top really gently. And as you move it sideways, it should actually just detach itself. And that would be a very easy way to get rid of the weight that or the mass that you actually have in your foil. So it's as simple as that. So it should actually resemble a little kind of phyllo cup, and that's exactly what you're looking for. And we'll proceed to remove the other piece as well. Of course, making sure not to ruin your pastry case. And of course, also being very careful not to pour in your green grams. And particularly for the blind baking, which is basically what we call this technique, very important that you always use items that are not going to really cook or flame up in your oven. So particularly green grams, some old beans or some old rice as well also works really well. And it always helps you to always get a beautiful casing out. And as you can see, it actually holds the pressure down really well, allowing the case to actually have a nice, beautiful thickness right to the very bottom. So coming back to our apples, these have now been cooking now for a total of about 9 to 10 minutes, and they should be done now. So very simple, just turn the heat off. And always have an extra bowl and probably a good sieve in handy at this particular stage. And at this point, all you need to do is proceed to pour your apple mixture right into your sieve. And all you're going to do now is just give it a few minutes to continue to drain all the excess liquid that is in there. Remember, you don't want to carry that liquid into your pies because it will get them soggy. So very important to actually just find a sieve, give your apples just a bit of time to continue draining, and also a bit of time to cool off before you actually proceed to filling your cases and baking it. So we are now done draining those, and we can now move those into a bowl on the side. we can now discard the rest of the liquid. And at this stage now, all you need to do is give your apples just a bit of time to cool off. And then we basically go into the last and final process of filling our cases. And of course, just putting the creme de la creme on it, which would basically be the puff pastry, which we reserved in the fridge to use a little later. But before we do proceed, we're gonna give our apples just a few minutes to cool off. And when we do come back, I'm going to take you into the next stage of assembling your pie and baking it. And we're just going to go for it and call it a day. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. For those of you who are just with us, we're now just at the last and final stage of finishing off your apple pie. And it's a very, very simple technique. As you can see, we've got some two rounded or semi-rounded sheets of some puff pastry, which we're gonna finish off and place onto the pies. But before we do so, we're going to start our first step by filling our pie, of course, with a bit of the apples. Now, once you get to the very top, proceed to use your spoon to just crush them right over the surface, giving you a bit more room to add a bit more filling. And of course, also another reminder, always try and reserve the liquid. Please don't add the liquid into the pastry because it will get very soggy. And proceed to the very top. And now your filling is in. Just using a fork, just level that up. And now the last and the final process, basically placing on the lid of your pie, of course. Very, very simple as well. I basically just used the same bowl to actually make the lid for the pie crust. And all I needed to do was just place the container right over the pastry and allow it to just make a small indentation and cut about 1/4 centimeter around the extra edges, just to give it a bit of more room to expand. And all you're left to do now is place that right over the top of your pie, and using your fork, of course, just proceed now to just fit it on tight. So the trick is very simple. All you need to do is just dig into your pie crust, into your puff pastry, and then just squeeze it in as if to try and trap that apple that is on the inside. And remember also to be very gentle while doing so. And all you need to do is use your fork and go around right until you've got almost somewhat like a dome shape right around the top of your pie. And now very simply just grab a small knife and proceed to trim off any excess pastry that you may have. Of course, very important that you actually go around to make sure you didn't actually miss any of the excess pastry that needed to be trimmed off. Right, simple as that. And once you've gotten a nice, beautiful topping there that can actually just cover the crust, now finish off by using your fork to now just put the final seal, which is now basically pressing it the same way you started, but of course doing it towards the outside of the dish, making sure, of course, to completely trap the contents inside. Once done, reconstitute it with your fingertips or by hand, and very simply proceed now to brush the pie from the top. And for that you'll need just 1 whole egg, and just a little bit of kitchen towel or a brush if you have one. All you need to do now is just fold that, dip it in some of your egg, and just proceed to brush the top of your puff pastry, making sure to go right in between the ridges and all around your case. And of course, making sure not to put too much. So it should actually just be like just brushing a thin coat of varnish right over a wooden surface. Simple as that. And all you're left to do now is actually just finish off your pie, and you can just do that by simply just grabbing your knife and just putting a nice little prick right over the top there. And that's basically gonna allow you to get allow the excess steam to disappear. And you can actually also proceed to make some very simple garnish there. So I'm just going to cut those into some very thin strips. And those, you could basically just set those right over your pie like that. Remember, these are actually going to cook and puff up really nicely. So just cutter them right over the top. It always helps also to have a pie that's a little more creative over the top. So just a little bit of those small strips of pastry that you have remaining, those always come in handy to be able to do so. Simple as that. And again, once more, just proceed to also brush those. Remember, this is particularly very important for the fact that it actually is going to give them a nice, beautiful golden color. And second of all, it also just aids for a nice, beautiful finish. So simple as that. All you're left to do now is transfer this onto your baking tray and into a hot oven. So my oven is set at 200 degrees. I'm just going to calibrate my timer for about 4 to 5 minutes. And all you need to do now is slide that into the oven. Give that a bit of time to just allow the puff pastry to cook. And once it's done, you can just take it off and you can just proceed to serving your dish. But we are going to give it just a few minutes before we conclude, and I get to show you what it looks like. So we are going to take one last and final break. And when we come back, we're going to take this out and you're going to be able to see what it looks like. So please hang on and don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a very, very short while. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who've been bearing with us, we are now at the last and final stage. And now our pie is definitely done. We're just going to take that out of the oven. And we're going to set that on a small, beautiful plate on the side. So I'm just going to use my pair of tongs to pick that up. And as you can now see, ladies and gentlemen, a nice, beautiful finish of that pie there. But always very important to have a little bit extra to go that extra mile. And I'm just going to finish that off by just drizzling just a bit of, sprinkling just a bit of that beautiful icing sugar. And just dust that lightly, giving it a nice, beautiful appearance over the top. And your apple pie is as simple as done, and that is as simple as I would present it. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've had fun today as I have. We have now come to the last part of the show, and we're just going to conclude it by saying thank you so much for tuning in. I will also remind you to do check out our Facebook page, do check out our YouTube links, plenty of stuff there for you to learn from and also to do some research on. But from our end, we're going to conclude by saying thank you so much. Enjoy your evening, and until the next episode, it's goodbye from all of us.